The house on Maple Street had been my sanctuary for 40 years. Its creaky wooden floors, the chipped paint on the porch railing, the garden where my late wife, Eleanor, once grew roses. They were more than just a home. They were the chapters of my life, written in every scuff mark and sun-faded curtain. At 72, I, Harold Grayson, had no intention of leaving. But life, as I've learned, doesn't always honor your plans. It started with a phone call from my daughter, Lily. Her voice, usually bright and teasing, carried a nervous edge. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. I could hear her fiancé, Mark, in the background, his voice a low hum, urging her on. They were getting married in 6 months, and Lily had her heart set on a wedding that could rival a Hollywood production. A venue on a cliffside vineyard, a live band, a dress flown in from Paris, the kind of extravagance that made my modest pension seem like pocket change. "Dad," she said, hesitating, "we're a bit short on funds. Mark's parents are helping, but we were wondering if you could sell the house. You know, downsize, move into something smaller. It'd cover the wedding and give you a fresh start." I stood in my kitchen, gripping the phone, staring at the fridge where Eleanor's old recipes were still taped, yellowed and curling at the edges. Sell the house. The words felt like a betrayal. This was the home where Lily had taken her first steps, where we'd laughed over burnt Thanksgiving turkeys, where Eleanor and I had danced in the living room to old jazz records. It was all I had left of her. "Lily," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "This house is my life. You know that." "I know, Dad," she replied, her tone softening. But there was a firmness beneath it. "But it's just a house. You're alone now. You don't need all that space. And this wedding, it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Please." I wanted to argue, to tell her how every corner of this place held a memory of Eleanor, of her childhood, of us as a family. But Lily had always been stubborn, a trait she'd inherited from her mother. And Mark, well, he had a way of amplifying her wants into needs. I said I'd think about it. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, Lily's calls became more frequent, each one a gentle but relentless push. She sent me listings for cozy apartments, brochures for retirement communities with names like Sunset Haven. Mark even stopped by one evening, his salesman smile in full force, talking about property values and market trends like I was some naive investor. "You'd be set for life, Harold," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I bristled at his familiarity but stayed silent. The pressure wore me down. I wasn't sleeping. The thought of losing the house felt like losing Eleanor all over again. But Lily was my daughter, my only child. I'd always given her everything I could: piano lessons, college tuition, a car when she turned 18. If this was what she needed to start her new life, how could I say no? So, I agreed. I called a realtor, a brisk woman named Susan who smelled of lavender and ambition. She walked through the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood, jotting notes about potential and curb appeal. I felt like a stranger in my own home as she talked about staging it for buyers. The for sale sign went up the next week, a bright red wound in my front yard. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple, newlyweds themselves, bought it for a price that made Susan beam. I signed the papers in a daze, my hand trembling as I handed over the keys. Lily was thrilled, already planning floral arrangements and catering menus. "You're the best, Dad," she said, hugging me tightly. But I felt hollow, like I'd traded my soul for her happiness. I moved into a small apartment across town, a sterile box with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. My furniture, the pieces Eleanor and I had chosen together, looked out of place, like relics in a museum. I kept a few boxes of keepsakes photo albums, Eleanor's gardening tools, a quilt she'd made, but most of it went into storage. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure something out. But the truth was, I felt unmoored, a man adrift in a life I no longer recognized. What Lily didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been working on a backup plan. It started as a quiet thought, a whisper in the back of my mind as I watched the realtor hammer that sign into my lawn. I wasn't going to let this house, this life, slip away without a fight. I'd spent years as an accountant, meticulous and methodical, always planning for the unexpected. And now, I was going to use every bit of that skill to take back what was mine. The first step was research. I spent evenings at the local library, poring over property laws and real estate regulations. I learned about liens, title disputes, and something called a right of first refusal. It was a long shot, but there was a clause in the sale contract that caught my eye, a technicality about the buyer's financing. If they failed to secure their mortgage within a certain window, the sale could be voided. It was a slim chance, but it was enough to spark hope. I started digging into the buyers. The Wilsons. They were young, eager, but overextended. Their loan application was shaky, cobbled together with high-interest credit and a cosigner who seemed less than reliable. I didn't want to hurt them. They seemed like decent people, but this was my home. I reached out to an old friend, Tom, a retired lawyer with a knack for finding loopholes. Over coffee, I laid out my plan, and his eyes lit up. "Harold," he said, grinning, "you're a sly old fox." We worked quietly, discreetly. Tom made calls, pulled strings, and found a contact at the bank handling the Wilsons' loan. A few well-placed questions about their financial stability, a nudge about stricter lending standards. It wasn't illegal, just strategic. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances with Lily. I attended wedding planning meetings, nodded at her choices, even helped her pick out invitations. But inside, I was counting the days. The bank's response came faster than I'd hoped. The Wilsons' loan was flagged for review, their financing teetering on the edge of collapse. If it fell through, the sale could be undone. I'd have a chance to buy back my home, maybe at a lower price, using the money I'd saved from the sale. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was mine, born from years of love for a house that held my heart. As the wedding date approached, Lily was radiant, oblivious to my quiet rebellion. She didn't know about the late-night library visits, the calls with Tom, the careful steps I was taking to reclaim what I'd lost. I wanted her to have her dream wedding, but I also wanted my home. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control, a sense that I could rewrite this story. But life, as I said, doesn't always honor your plans. And as I stood in my cramped apartment, staring at a photo of Eleanor and me on our own wedding day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, something neither Lily nor I could predict. The weeks leading up to Lily's wedding were a blur of anticipation and secrecy. I played the part of the supportive father, attending tastings and nodding through discussions about centerpieces. But my mind was elsewhere. Every night, I'd sit at the small table in my apartment, surrounded by legal documents and scribbled notes, piecing together my plan to reclaim the house. The Wilsons' loan was still under review, and Tom was optimistic. "It's a house of cards, Harold," he said over the phone. "One good push, and it'll collapse." But doubt gnawed at me. What if the loan went through? What if the Wilsons secured their financing, and my home slipped through my fingers for good? I tried to focus on the present, on Lily's joy, but the ache of losing the house was a constant weight. I'd walk past Maple Street sometimes, just to see it, the new owner's car in the driveway, their laughter spilling out from the open windows. It felt like watching someone else live my life. Lily, meanwhile, was caught up in her own world. She and Mark came by the apartment one evening, their faces glowing with excitement. They spread out photos of the vineyard venue, a sprawling estate with rolling hills and fairy lights strung across ancient oaks. "It's going to be perfect, Dad," Lily said, her eyes sparkling. "And it's all thanks to you." Her gratitude stung, not because I didn't want her happiness, but because it came at such a cost. I smiled, hiding the turmoil inside. "Anything for you, sweetheart," I said, and she hugged me, oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. Mark, as usual, was all charm, thanking me profusely, but I noticed the way his eyes flicked around the apartment, sizing it up, as if calculating its worth. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me, a tired old man, easily swayed, or a father who'd do anything for his daughter. The truth was, I was both. But I was also something else, someone who'd spent a lifetime planning, saving, and protecting what mattered. I hadn't told Lily about my backup plan, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wasn't sure she'd understand. She saw the house as a means to an end, a stepping stone to her new life with Mark. To me, it was the foundation of everything I'd built. Tom called me one rainy afternoon with news. "The bank's tightening the screws," he said, his voice low with excitement. "The Wilsons' cosigner bailed, and their credit score's taken a hit. If we keep the pressure on, the loan's as good as dead." I thanked him, my heart racing, but a new fear crept in. If I succeeded, what would it mean for Lily? The money from the house sale was already tied up in deposits and refundable ones, according to the vendors. If the sale fell through, would her dream wedding crumble too? I pushed the thought aside and focused on the next step. Tom had found a real estate investor, a quiet man named Carl who specialized in distressed properties. Carl was willing to step in if the Wilsons' deal collapsed, offering to buy the house at a discount and sell it back to me at a manageable price. It was a risky move. Carl wasn't doing this out of charity, but it was a lifeline. I wired him a small deposit from my savings, a leap of faith that left my bank account thinner than I liked. Meanwhile, Lily's wedding plans grew more extravagant. She called one evening, her voice bubbling with excitement about a string quartet she'd booked. "It's going to be magical, Dad," she said. "You'll see." But her words were punctuated by a faint strain, as if she sensed something was off. I wondered if she'd noticed my distance, the way I avoided talking about the house. I wanted to tell her everything, to explain why I was fighting so hard. But I couldn't. Not yet. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out an old photo album from the storage boxes. It was one Eleanor had made, filled with pictures of Lily as a child, her gap-toothed grin at her 5th birthday, her tiny hands covered in dirt from helping in the garden. There was a photo of the three of us on the porch, Eleanor's arm around me, Lily balanced on my knee. I traced my finger over Eleanor's face, wishing she were here to guide me. She'd always known how to balance love and firmness with Lily, something I'd never quite mastered. The next morning, I drove to Maple Street, parking across from the house. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a new mailbox with Wilson painted on it. My chest tightened, but I reminded myself of Tom's words, a house of cards. I just needed to wait. But waiting was agony. Every day brought Lily's wedding closer, and with it, the risk that my plan would unravel. Then, a breakthrough. Tom called to say the bank had officially rejected the Wilsons' loan. The sale was on hold, the contract teetering on the edge of nullification. Carl was ready to move, his offer already drafted. I felt triumphant, but the victory was bittersweet. Lily would be devastated if the wedding budget took a hit, and I wasn't sure how to break the news or if I even should. I decided to keep quiet for now, focusing on the logistics. Carl and I met at a diner, where he slid a contract across the table. "This gets you back in the house," he said, his voice gruff but kind. But you'll need to move fast. The Wilsons are scrambling to find another lender. I nodded, signing the papers with a steadier hand than I'd expected. For the first time in months, I felt like I was steering my own life again. But as I drove back to the apartment, a new question haunted me. What would Lily think when she found out? Would she see me as the father who'd saved his home, or the one who'd sabotaged her dreams? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. I wasn't giving up. Not on the house, not on Lily, and not on the life I'd built with Eleanor's memory. The air was thick with tension as the wedding drew closer. Lily was a whirlwind of energy, finalizing details and sending me photos of her dress fittings. Her excitement was infectious, but it only deepened my guilt. My plan was moving forward. Carl had submitted his offer, and the Wilsons were running out of options, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying her. I'd always been her rock, the one who fixed things, who made sacrifices. Now, I was risking her happiness for my own. I kept my routine steady to avoid suspicion. Mornings were spent at the diner with Tom, going over paperwork and strategizing. Afternoons, I'd meet Lily and Mark at various venues, nodding along as they debated table settings or cake flavors. But my mind was always on Maple Street. The Wilsons had hired a new lawyer, a sharp young woman who was fighting to salvage their loan. Tom assured me it was a desperate move, but it made me uneasy. Time was running out. One evening, Lily invited me to dinner at her apartment. It was a small place, cluttered with wedding magazines and fabric swatches. Mark was there, as always, his presence filling the room like a too-loud radio. We ate pasta, and Lily talked nonstop about the guest list, the photographer, the honeymoon plans. I listened, smiling, but my thoughts kept drifting to the house. I imagined walking through its rooms again, sitting on the porch, feeling Eleanor's presence in the quiet. "Dad, you're awfully quiet," Lily said, her brow furrowing. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, caught off guard. For a moment, I considered telling her about the house, the plan, everything. But Mark cut in, laughing. "He's probably just overwhelmed by all this wedding stuff. Right, Harold?" I nodded, forcing a smile. But Lily's eyes lingered on me, searching. She'd always been perceptive, even as a child. I wondered how much she sensed. Later, as I helped clear the dishes, Lily pulled me aside. "Dad, you'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Her voice was soft, almost pleading. My heart ached. I wanted to spill everything, to explain why the house mattered so much. But I couldn't. "Not yet. I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. "Just tired." The next day, Tom called with an update. The Wilsons' new lawyer had hit a wall. The bank wasn't budging. Carl's offer was now the strongest contender, and the realtor was pushing to finalize it. I felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by dread. Lily's wedding was in 3 weeks, and the vendors were demanding final payments. If the house sale was reversed, the money would be tied up in escrow, leaving her short. I'd have to find a way to make it right. I started exploring options. My savings were modest, but I had an old life insurance policy from Eleanor's passing, one I'd never touched. It wasn't enough to cover the entire wedding, but it could bridge the gap. I called my financial advisor, a gruff man named Paul who'd known me since my accounting days. "You sure about this, Harold?" he asked. "That's your safety net." I told him I was sure, though I wasn't. It was another gamble, but I owed it to Lily. Meanwhile, Carl was moving fast. He'd secured a meeting with the realtor and the Wilsons' lawyer to discuss his offer. I tagged along, sitting quietly as Carl laid out his terms. The Wilsons' lawyer was visibly frustrated, her arguments thin. My clients have a right to this property, she said, but the realtor shook her head. The contract's clear. If the financing fails, the sale's void. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I was soaring. That night, I drove to Maple Street again. The house looked the same, but there was a new energy to it, as if it knew I was coming back. I sat in my car, imagining Eleanor's voice, calm and steady. "You're doing the right thing, Harold," she'd say. But was I? The line between right and wrong was blurring, and I wasn't sure where I stood. Lily called the next morning, her voice frantic. "Dad, there's a problem with the house sale. The realtor just called Mark. Something about the buyer's loan falling through." My heart stopped. I hadn't expected her to find out so soon. "What does that mean for the wedding?" she asked, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, searching for words. "I'll figure it out, Lily," I said. "I promise." I hung up, my hands shaking. The plan was working, but it was unraveling in ways I hadn't anticipated. Lily was scared, and I was the cause. I called Tom, who urged me to stay the course. "You're almost there, Harold. Don't back down now." But backing down wasn't the issue. It was the cost: Lily's trust, her joy, maybe even our relationship. I spent the next few days in a haze, juggling calls with Carl, Paul, and the realtor. The Wilsons were out of options. Their lawyer had conceded defeat. Carl's offer was accepted, and the house was mine again, pending final paperwork. I should have been elated, but all I could think about was Lily's voice on the phone, the fear in her words. I decided to come clean. I invited Lily to the apartment, sitting her down at the small table where I'd plotted my plan. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice unsteady. Her eyes widened, and I saw the little girl she'd once been, trusting me to make everything okay. I took a deep breath and started talking about the house, the plan, the love that had driven me to fight for it. Lily sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the table. I told her everything: how the house wasn't just a building, but a tapestry of memories. How losing it felt like losing her mother again. How I'd worked with Tom and Carl to undo the sale. I explained the Wilsons' shaky loan, the legal loopholes, the investor who'd helped me. I didn't sugarcoat it. I admitted I'd kept it from her, that I'd let her believe the wedding funds were secure while I fought for my home. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Lily's face was a storm of emotion: shock, hurt, anger. "You went behind my back," she said finally, her voice low. "You knew how much this wedding meant to me. And you sabotaged it." "No, Lily," I said, leaning forward. "I didn't want to hurt you. I was trying to save the house for me, for us, for your mother's memory. I thought I could fix it, make it work for both of us." "Fix it?" Her voice rose, sharp with betrayal. "Dad, the vendors need final payments next week. If the money's tied up, the wedding's off. Do you understand that?" Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt like the worst father in the world. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, standing up. "I need to think," she said, and left without another word. I sat there, staring at the empty chair, my chest heavy with regret. I'd wanted to protect what mattered to me, but I'd hurt the person who mattered most. For the next few days, Lily didn't call, didn't text. Mark left me a voicemail, his tone clipped, saying they were figuring things out. I felt like an outsider in my own family, a man who'd gambled and lost. But I wasn't done fighting. I called Paul, my financial advisor, and finalized the paperwork to cash out Eleanor's life insurance policy. It was enough to cover most of the wedding's remaining costs, though it left me with almost nothing. I wired the money to Lily's account, along with a note: For your dream wedding. I'm sorry. I didn't expect forgiveness. But I hoped it would show her I was trying. Meanwhile, the house deal was moving forward. Carl's offer was finalized, and the Wilsons were packing up. I visited Maple Street one last time before the closing, walking through the empty rooms. The new owners hadn't changed much, but it felt differentless mine. Somehow, I wondered if I'd fought for a ghost, a memory that couldn't be reclaimed. Tom met me at the house, his face lined with concern. You okay, Harold? He asked. I shrugged, unable to find the words. You got the house back, he said. That's what you wanted. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not with Lily's silence hanging over me. A week before the wedding, Lily finally called. Her voice was calmer, but guarded. I got the money, she said. Thank you. But I'm still mad. Dad, you should have told me. I apologized again, my throat tight. I know, I said. I thought I was doing the right thing. I couldn't lose the house. She sighed, and I could hear the weight of her thoughts. I get why you did it, she said. Mom loved that house. I do too. But you hurt me. Dad, you made me feel like my happiness didn't matter. Her words cut deep. But they were fair. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I'd overlooked hers. Can I see you? I asked. Before the wedding. She hesitated, then agreed to meet at the Vineyard venue the next day. When I arrived, she was standing under an oak tree, the fairy lights casting a soft glow on her face. She looked like Eleanor Strong, beautiful, but carrying a quiet hurt. We talked for hours, not just about the house or the wedding, but about everything: her childhood, her mother, the future. I told her about the life insurance money, how it was my last gift to her. And she cried, hugging me tightly. I don't want to lose you, Dad, she said. But I need to trust you. I nodded, promising to be honest, to include her in my decisions. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. We walked through the venue together, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope that we could rebuild. The house closing was scheduled for the day after the wedding. Carl had agreed to sell it back to me at a fair price, using the remaining funds from the original sale. I'd be stretched thin, but I'd have my home. I imagined moving back, filling the rooms with new memories, maybe even inviting Lily and Mark for Sunday dinners, like we used to have with Eleanor. As the wedding day approached, I focused on being there for Lily. I helped with last-minute details, drove to pick up decorations, and even practiced my father of the bride speech. The hurt between us was still there, but it was softening, like a bruise beginning to fade. I knew it would take time, but I was willing to wait. The night before the wedding, I sat in my apartment, looking at a photo of Eleanor. I hope I did right by you, I whispered. I didn't have all the answers, but I had faith that love, messy, complicated, and fierce, would carry us through. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. The vineyard bathed in golden light. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, the one Eleanor had picked out years ago for our anniversary. The venue was a vision: white roses cascading over arches, tables set with crystal and lace, the string quartet playing softly in the background. Lily had gotten her dream, and despite everything, I felt a swell of pride watching it come to life. I found her in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids, her dress a vision of ivory silk. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, we just stood there, father and daughter, the weight of the past weeks hanging between us. You look beautiful, I said, my voice catching. She smiled, a real smile, and hugged me. Thanks, Dad, she whispered, for everything. The ceremony was perfect. Lily walked down the aisle on my arm, her hand steady in mine. Mark waited at the altar, his grin wide and genuine. I gave her away with a mix of joy and sorrow, knowing this was the start of her new life, one I'd fought to make possible, even if it had cost us both. My speech at the reception was short but heartfelt, a toast to love and family, to the memories we carry and the ones we create. After the last dance, Lily pulled me aside. "I'm sorry I pushed you to sell the house," she said, her eyes glistening. "I didn't realize what it meant to you." I shook my head, taking her hands. "I should have talked to you, Lily. We both made mistakes." We stood there, the music fading, and I felt a sense of peace. We weren't fully healed, but we were on our way. The next morning, I met Carl at the realtor's office to finalize the house purchase. The paperwork was straightforward, and by noon, the keys were in my hand. I drove to Maple Street, my heart pounding as I unlocked the front door. The house was empty, the Wilsons' belongings gone, but it still felt like home. I walked through each room, touching the walls, remembering Eleanor's laughter, Lily's childhood giggles. I spent the day cleaning, unpacking the few boxes I'd brought from storage. The quilt Eleanor made went back on the bed, the photo albums on the shelf. I planted a new rose bush in the garden, a nod to her memory. As the sun set, I sat on the porch, the familiar creak of the swing beneath me. For the first time in months, I felt whole. But life, as always, had one more surprise. A week after the wedding, Lily called, her voice hesitant. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." She and Mark had been talking, and they'd decided to move closer to Maple Street. "We want to be near you," she said, "and I want my kids to grow up in that house, like I did." I was speechless, tears stinging my eyes. "I'd like that," I managed to say. Over the next few months, we rebuilt our relationship. Lily and Mark visited often, helping me fix up the house. We painted the porch, planted more roses, even hung new curtains ones Lily picked out, a soft blue that reminded me of Eleanor's eyes. The house was alive again, filled with laughter and love. Looking back, I realized the house wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of what we could endure. I'd fought for it, not just for myself, but for the family we'd been and the one we were becoming. Lily and I had hurt each other, but we'd also learned to listen, to forgive, to hold on to what mattered. As spring bloomed, so did our new chapter. The house on Maple Street was no longer just a memory, it was a living, breathing part of our lives again. Lily and Mark bought a small place nearby, and Sunday dinners became a tradition. We'd sit around the old oak table, the one Eleanor and I had bought at a flea market, sharing stories and passing plates of roast chicken. Lily's laughter filled the rooms, and I saw glimpses of her mother in her smile. One afternoon, while we were gardening together, Lily paused, her hands covered in dirt. "Dad," she said, "I'm glad you fought for this place. It's home." I nodded, my throat tight. "It's yours too," I said. "Always will be." She hugged me, and I felt the weight of the past year lift, replaced by a quiet certainty that we'd made it through. I never told Lily the full extent of my plan, the late nights, the risks, the moments I doubted myself. Some stories are better left untold, their lessons carried in the heart. Instead, I focused on the present, on the rose bushes blooming in the garden, on the photos we added to the albums, on the life we were building together. The house, like our family, had weathered its storms. It wasn't perfect, the floors still creaked, the paint still chipped, but it was ours. And in its walls, I found not just memories, but hope. Hope that love, even when tested, could endure. Hope that a father's mistakes could be forgiven. Hope that a home could be more than a place, it could be a promise. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold. I thought of Eleanor. She'd be proud. I decided. Not just of me, but of Lily. Of us. We'd fought. We'd faltered. But we'd found our way back. And in the end, that was enough.